yards shy of the record. Williams breaks a hole. Williams had a record book. Ricky Williams runs to the Hall of Fame. Touchback. Ricky Williams, touchdown.
Young from the shotgun. Back to throw. Vince looks. Under pressure. He'll tuck it in run. Vince to the 5. Young. Touchdown, Texas. Touchdown, Vince Young. He's done it again.
Longhorn Nation, we're back.
Hello and welcome into the inaugural edition of the Lone Star Lowdown podcast. I am Matt Galatzan, your host, and I'm joined by my partner in crime over there at Texas Longhorns on SI, Zach Dimmitt. Zach, how's it going? Are you excited to get this podcast rolling?
Yeah, no, it's a really big deal that we're doing this. Excited to do this the rest of the off season and leading into the start of the season this fall. So yeah, it should be pretty exciting.
Yeah, and we had a lot of big news we got to get to via the transfer portal over the weekend. Texas was very active both in football and basketball, so lots to get to here. But as always, you can find all of our work over at Texas Longhorns on SI. We do everything from covering Texas football, Texas basketball, baseball, everything in between. You can find news, analysis, and all the latest breaking stuff over there. But Zach, let's start off. Obviously there's a lot to get to, but let's start off with the, in my opinion, the most moving news of the weekend was the loss of Bert Auburn to the transfer portal. He was with the program for a long time. He, scholarship Bert, as he became known, because he got that scholarship from Sark in the team meeting. And, he was a big part of the Texas program. He leaves Texas as the, all-time leading scorer in program history. He had a lot of great moments, a lot of not so great moments as well, as we saw in the Big 12. In the SEC championship and the college football playoff. But what's your view on the whole Auburn situation? Do you think this is a good move for him? Would you rather have seen him stick around and compete, or is there more better opportunities out there for him in the long run?
To answer your question, no, I don't think he should have stuck around. I think it was one of those things where the ship had kind of sailed, and when it comes to a kicker, you only have to do one job, and I think that I just think that his psyche had probably been thrown off a bit, and it's hard to blame him. You ask any Texas Longhorn fan to go out there and do what he has to, what he's asked to do, and it's a really tough job. And so, but at the same time, we're at a point where this is essentially professional football, and you just can't have a guy missing kicks the way he was. But with all that said, I think that people like to joke and say, oh, good riddance, goodbye to Bert Auburn, all that stuff. But, pay the dude his respects. I mean, we're talking about, like you mentioned, the all-time leading scorer in Texas Longhorns history. When you think about the elite kickers that have come through this program, it's amazing that he is number one on that list. I knew that he had broken the record for most field goals in the SEC championship, or most field goals in Longhorns history in the SEC championship against Georgia. But then after that, and in that game, and then after that against Arizona State 2 games later, it was just clear that something wasn't right there. And it's hard to blame him. I mean, it's a hard job to do, and I think it just kind of got to his head a little bit. A fresh start is best for him and for Texas, and I think I wish him the best. But people also need to give him his respect as well as he departs.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that he sort of earned his flowers here at Texas at a certain point. I mean, he did a lot for the program. It's hard to it's hard to take away all the things that he did, but at the end of the day, I like you said, this is basically pro football now, right? You can't have a glaring hole in your roster. You can't have a glaring weakness if you're going to compete for a national championship, or if you're at the NFL, if you're going to compete for a Super Bowl. And as we've seen in the NFL for a very long time, if a kicker starts missing a couple kicks, unless it's the Dallas Cowboys, they're gonna move on from him, and they're gonna find somebody else out there. It's a lot easier to find a kicker, at a lower level than it is to find a skill position player, which is where they ended up going, which is what we'll move into next year with the addition of Texas State kicker
Mason Shipley.
Sorry, that's running down my notes here. Mason Shipley, 2023 All Sun Belt selection with Texas State last year. You would assume that he's going to take over the starting job, but that's still up in the air. Will Stone is still on campus, so there will probably be a little bit of a competition there. But overall, pretty good resume for this kid, right? He was 31 of 35 in his career. He's hit 58 of his 59 extra points. He's got a long of 47 yards from his field goals. He made all 15 of them in 2023. And then last year he was 15 of 19 and hit a 60-yarder to reset his career long against Sam Houston State. So a lot of things to like there. There's obviously some concerns in the sense that he's never really, done it on a big level. He's always been at a group of five level, and he hasn't faced the kind of environments that he's going to face at the next level with the SEC championship, or next year heading into Gainesville, maybe he has to make a big kick at the end of the game. He's never really kind of faced that before, but obviously very big addition for Texas. You want to shore up that position as best you can. How do you think that this affects the special teams? And do you believe that this sort of solves all of their issues over there, or do you think that they're probably going to keep looking for a little bit more?
It remains to be seen if it solves any issues, but I think they feel like they found their guy. I don't think there's any need to try to find another kicker in the portal or anything. I think they're going to let Will Stone compete a little bit, but if Will Stone hadn't already won the job, I don't think that he's going to do it now unless Shipley just really struggles once he gets to campus. But Will Stone will still have a big role in the team for sure. He handled kickoffs last year, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know that he was booting that thing out of the end zone quite a bit, and that's obviously pretty important. And it shouldn't get overlooked at all. He'll still remain a big part of the team, and I think he could enter the portal. I have no idea. He could try to look for another option out there. It's hard to blame him, but I think he definitely has a role, and I think they definitely want to see him stick around. But Shipley just has that experience, and like you said, he hasn't been on the big stage, but you never know. He could get on the big stage and not be phased at all. We can't say this early if that's going to affect him or not for sure. But he's hit a 60-yarder before. You don't see many college kickers being able to have that kind of leg. And so I just think, it's just one kick, but I think he's really got that potential. He has that experience. And it remains to be seen if he solves the problems. He'll have a few missed kicks, and Texas fans will get kind of nervous, but he's going to have a big opportunity first game of the season to show if he's the guy on the big stage against Ohio State. So, Texas won't want to rely on field goals against Ohio State, but I think they probably won't be able to win that game unless he has a solid performance. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and we saw that last year in the Cotton Bowl. They benched Bert Auburn. They technically had Will Stone out there doing their kicks, and had they had the confidence to maybe settle for a couple field goals there as opposed to going for it on fourth down late in the game, or they could have had some. Their script might have been a little bit different. It wouldn't have made a difference. Down there late in the game during that during that pitch that the infamous pitch that was heard around the world that set Texas fans on fire. But there's still plenty of opportunities there where they probably could have used a kicker that they could have relied on, and it could have changed the game a little bit. And same in the SEC championship. They didn't want to have to rely on Bert, trotting Bert out there because they weren't confident based on what had happened the last couple weeks. And he all but cost him the game. There's obviously some other things in there that cost him the game as well, but that was a very, very big factor. And he nearly lost them the college football playoff matchup against Arizona State as well. So, I think that if they believe in this kid, they Well, let me rephrase that. I think they do believe in this kid because otherwise they wouldn't have brought him in.
Right.
I think that they think that he is going to be as reliable as they come. And I think that they're probably going to figure out a way to use him and Will Stone, in a very similar fashion to the way that they use Bert Auburn and Will Stone. Will Stone will probably handle the kickoff duties and continue to excel at that. And then you bring in Mason Shipley and, he hopefully can be the next Brandon Aubrey for the Texas Longhorns. He can do it the Cowboys with that monster leg. And if you can hit a 60-yarder, you got a pretty monster leg. So, we'll see what happens there. I think that this was obviously a very big need for them to fill. It doesn't carry the same star power as a wide receiver signing or a tight end or a defensive tackle, like we're going to talk about in a minute. But it's still a very important position for them to fill. It's something that really held them back from reaching their full potential last year. And it was something that they desperately needed to address. And I just don't think that there was any way that they were going to be confident enough in Bert Auburn going into an Ohio State game next year. Maybe if Bert had a few games to sort of recalibrate his psyche, and hit some kicks. Like if Ohio State was later in the year, you could probably, like maybe right before conference play started, maybe you could kind of argue that he could fix a few things and get, shake those yips. But, August 31st, you're marching into the shoe, and it's going to be the same environment that it was in Dallas and that it was in Atlanta the last couple times they played there. So it'll be nice to have some fresh blood in there, I think, for them. But let's move on to some of these other signings. They had a huge weekend in the transfer portal. Not only did they address the kicker, but they also addressed two other very big needs here. With tight end Jack Endries out of Cal. Losing Gunnar Helm is obviously a big loss for Texas, with him heading to the NFL, but it's also a little bit concerning because there wasn't any proven talent behind him, right? You have Jordan Washington, who they really love. You have Spencer Shannon, who they really like, but these guys don't have any, Power 5 experience, right? They haven't gone out there and caught a bunch of passes. They don't have a huge rapport with Arch yet. They're working on it in spring, but it's still a work in progress. Having a guy who has Power 5 experience and has been very successful and sort of fits a mold that Texas is looking for out of their tight end, who could kind of do it all. What made Gunnar Helm so successful and got him so involved in the Texas offense wasn't just the fact that he could catch passes. He could block. He could, block in the run game, and, on a play action, he could slip out on a screen. He had reliable hands. He was always in the right place at the right time. He was in what Sark likes to call the circle of trust, right? And it feels like Jack Endries, who they just brought in, could sort of fit those roles. Do you think that this is are we over analyzing this? Is this as big of a signing as I'm making it out to be, or do you think that he could have a huge impact with the Horns next year?
I think it is a super big signing. I think for the rest of the country, it'll go overlooked a little bit potentially because he's not like a super huge name. But I know he was definitely coveted for sure in the portal by a lot of big teams. But the casual fan around the country is not going to have any idea who Jack Endries is until he destroys their secondary next year, because this dude has some speed at the tight end position. You just watch him run past cornerbacks this past season. And, I think with Gunnar Helm, he obviously had some time to develop and, grow into the player that he was. And I think that they still want that from the rest of their tight ends moving forward. But at the same time, you have to capitalize on this championship window with Arch. And if you don't have a veteran tight end, when you know that you could potentially get one out of the portal, why would you pass up on that opportunity? And I think that he could be here for the next, 2 years if he wants to as well, because I think he only has 2 years under his belt when he was at Cal. And this guy was a walk-on at first. So imagine what he's going to be able to grow into over the next 2 years if he's already, based on what he's already done the past 2 seasons. But the recipe for success at tight end for Texas has been clear. And for many of the positions, quite frankly, is just wait your turn. And then it'll pay off in the end. And I think that's what they're trying to tell the rest of their young tight ends is just wait for another few seasons and you're going to get your turn, as you've seen with JT Sanders and Gunnar Helm. And so I think that this was it's arguably their most important move. We'll see if they make any other big moves this spring, but once the season rolls around and we see how he's doing, we could look back and think, oh, that was their biggest portal move for sure. But we'll see. I think that he's definitely going to be a weapon for Arch, and the kind of chemistry that they can put together this season could end up, leading Texas back to the CFP. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note. I mean, you make a great point, and then Sark is kind of a wait your turn kind of a coach, right? He's if a freshman earns his spot, then he's going to play him. But by and large, he's all about the development in this program. So, when you see a tight end get brought in via the transfer portal, you think that a guy like Jordan Washington or a Spencer Shannon might get a little bit discouraged, but I don't think that's the case because Texas likes to play multiple tight ends. These kids will still play, but now right. Texas has a veteran presence in that room that they can kind of rely on in certain moments. And, there's still a long way to go in this camp, right? They still have a week of spring football. They have all of their summer workouts and their summer meetings and things like that. They've got all of fall camp. Jordan Washington could still theoretically be this team starter in tight end number 1. Spencer Shannon could absolutely get some playing time. This doesn't mean that these guys aren't going to see the field next year. So I think that all it does is really strengthen the room and give them some depth at a position that's really critical to what Steve Sarkisian likes to do. I don't know that it's the most critical move that they made either. I think that probably bringing in Emmett Mosley at wide receiver was arguably a bigger move, just because you don't know what's going to happen if one of these other receivers go down. You just have so much youth and experience there. So, but it's obviously a massive move, and they again, they're not done. We saw them make another big move here, and it's sort of a wild situation. I was away on vacation, so I didn't really get to follow the whole thing very closely. But Maryland defensive tackle Levon Johnson signed with Texas after he signed with North Carolina. I'm not really sure how that all went down. Zach, can you kind of walk us through the timeline on that and what exactly happened there?
Yeah, so I believe it was what day is it? Today's Monday. I guess it was Friday. Yeah. Is when that happened. And I remember in the morning, I believe it was On3 that reported, he signed with North Carolina, and it was kind of like, okay. It was kind of surprising for Texas fans after he had visited campus last week. And, to see how quickly he committed to UNC, it was like, oh, okay, well, it is what it is, move on. And then a few hours later, the On3, or I believe it was 24/7, reports that now, he's signed with Texas after he had just signed with North Carolina. And we had just published a story about this guy signing with North Carolina. And then now I'm just like, I'm getting a headache over here just trying to figure out how this all happens. But regardless of the legality behind it, he's going to head to Texas. He gives them some great depth at defensive line or on the defensive line. And I'm very curious on how all that happened. If he signed with North Carolina and signed with Texas, he can't be signed to 2 different teams. I mean, I don't think that's rocket science or anything. So kind of curious to see what happened there. But, he gives Texas some great depth. And like we were talking about with tight ends, this guy, he has 2 years of experience under his belt, but still relatively unproven. Only has like one career sack, I believe. But you look at guys like Vernon Broughton, when he started his career at Texas, not a ton of production of the first couple of seasons, but then he explodes in his final year. And I think that they, like with other positions we were talking about, they want to point to that as kind of, your time will come if you put in the work. And I think he's going to give them some great depth. Texas fans shouldn't freak out if he's not putting up 10 sacks next season. That's just not going to be realistic. But he's going to ideally help stop the run game, plug those holes. And I think it could be a great addition that maybe doesn't flash as much as people would expect, but it definitely is super important for Sark and the D-line.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this was one of the major positions of concern for us going into the season was, on the interior of the defensive line, because when you lose an Alfred Collins and a Vernon Broughton and Bill Norton and Tia Savea and Jermaine Lollet, I mean, that's your top 5 defensive tackles right there. And yeah, you have some young talent with an Alex January and a Melvin Hills, and you have Justice Terry coming in as a true freshman, but you really want some experience and some proven bodies in there. And by bringing in Levon Johnson, and then you also have the previous signings of Cole Brevard and Travis Shaw and Hero Canoe, and it really makes you feel a whole lot better about the room. We'll have to see how these guys actually perform in the SEC, because none of these guys have any SEC experience, but it gives you some peace of mind that you've got some experienced players at that position who can give you a lot of different things and give you the depth and the rotation on the defensive line that we've seen from them over the years. Because when Texas has been at its most successful in the last 2 years under Steve Sarkisian and Pete Kwiatkowski, they have had a very deep defensive tackle unit that they can rotate in and out as they see fit. It started with Trevondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, with Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins behind them. And then last year it was Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton with Bill Norton and Jermaine Lollet and Tia Savea there. So they've been very, very good against the run the last couple of years. I think that by bringing in four guys now and potentially 5, which we'll talk about in a second, they're really doubling down on that sort of identity. It remains to be seen how much now with 4 transfer defensive tackles, how much Justice Terry will we see? How much Alex January and Melvin Hills will we see? It kind of makes you think, and especially if they bring in another body, where do these other pieces that are already on the roster fit in that they've spoken that they're so high about? I think Alex January still cracks the rotation. I think Justice Terry still gets some playing time. I don't know that he immediately week 1 has a huge impact, but I think as the season goes on and you have more depth concerns about due to injury or wear and tear or whatever, that he could sort of find his way in there as well. But if even if they don't bring in another body, if you're 6 deep at the position or 7 deep at the position, you feel really good about what a few weeks ago we saw as a weakness, right? So big signing there for them. The whole thing with him signing with UNC, I mean, this is kind of a microcosm of what college football has turned into, right? It's like not only are these kids signing or reportedly signing with one school, they're flipping to another school, and then they're probably going to do something here and do some. It's just all it's turned into kind of a mess. It's not. Yeah. It's certainly not to the level of the Nico Iamaleava situation over there in Tennessee and UCLA, but it's certainly wild. They need to figure out a way to sort of clamp things down here. But like I mentioned a minute ago, they're still not necessarily done at the defensive tackle spot. We like that they have 5 bodies there, but according to some other reports here from On3's Hayes Fawcett, Texas is also in the mix for Syracuse defensive lineman Murad Watson. He, alongside Ohio State, Tennessee, and Georgia, Texas is right there in the mix. This guy is 6'3", 313 pounds. He finished his freshman season last year with 30 total tackles, 1 sack, 1 pass breakup, and he had 6 tackles in a big upset over Miami last year. But he's a big body. He's going to have 3 years of eligibility left, which is a different thing than LaVon Johnson or some of these other guys that they brought in. So he feels like he would be more of a he adds depth to the room, but also does he give them some more stability for the future as well? Because after Cole Brevard and Travis Shaw and Hero Canoe and all these other guys move on next year, you're kind of right back in the same position as you are this year, or as you were in this year with Justice Terry, Alex January, and a bunch of, unproven things and young guys. So if you can bring in a guy with some Power 5 experience that you can keep around for long term, I think that would be great as well. What are your impressions on them being in the mix for this guy? Do you think they ultimately land him or not? Or, would this be kind of a luxury pickup for them?
Yeah, a little bit of a luxury. I mean, because you're just kind of adding depth at a position you've already heavily addressed, and you can never have enough defensive line depth, that's for sure. But it's going to be tough to land him. I can't predict whether or not he will for sure come to Texas. But when you look at the other teams in the mix for him, Tennessee, Georgia, and Ohio State, that's some really stiff competition right there. And all those teams are going to try to pull out all the stops, and that just shows how he's viewed after just one season in college. He's obviously teams see that he has a lot of potential clearly, and I think that it's become clear that they're not necessarily just building just for this season. It's seasons after next and after that. And so knowing that you got Arch Manning, I know it's on the defensive line, but knowing that you got Arch Manning for potentially 2 years, you want to make sure that you have the future of all your positions secured for beyond just 2025. And so if they land him, it is kind of a luxury because he may not have a heavy impact next season. You never know how things play out, but I think it'd be super nice. It's a guy that has a lot of things to be excited about moving forward after just one season. And Syracuse, I know that they haven't necessarily been an elite football program in years past, but they had a really solid year last season. And so he was playing against some good competition in the ACC. I know it's not quite the level of Big Ten and the SEC, or maybe even the Big 12, but I think it'd be really nice for Texas to get Watson, and it would be a luxury.
Yeah, and defensive tackle is one of the key positions on this football team. It's sort of the identity, I think, of the rest of the defense. Kind of starts up front. And having some more reliable bodies in there will be really big for them, especially that they can plan for the future with if they can bring in a guy like Watson, then they have a really good opportunity to sort of solidify that position going forward. But let's talk about one more. We'll go with two more little bits of news here for football before we jump into basketball to wrap things up. But Texas is also reportedly in the mix for a wide receiver as well. They brought in Emmett. Help me out here, Zach. What's
Emmett Mosley the fifth?
I've got so many names going through here with the portal. Yes, Emmett Mosley the fifth. They brought in him last week and then sort of gave themselves that veteran presence on the outside that they can put alongside Ryan Wingo and DeAndre Moore. And they don't, so they don't have to rely on all this depth that is just occupied by inexperience and freshmen for the most part. Because behind Wingo and DeAndre Moore, it's mostly true freshmen and guys who don't have on-field experience. There's maybe a little late game trash cleanup sort of duty from a guy like Parker Livingstone or something like that early in the season, but for the most part, they don't really have a lot of in-game experience behind those two guys. So bringing in Mosley was a very big pickup for them, but apparently they're not done. According to On3's Pete Nakos, BYU wide receiver Keelan Marion is also on Texas's radar. He spent 2 seasons with BYU. He's more of a return specialist. On the face, he was first-team All-American and second-team All-Big 12 this selection for his special teams production. But he very well could find a way to crack wide receiver rotation as well, just given the lack of depth that they have and the lack of experience that they have there. But Zach, what are your impressions of them being in the running for this guy, and how do you see him fitting in?
Yeah, he just entered the portal a few days ago, so I think there's still, I mean, some things move pretty quickly, but I think there's still a little bit of ways to go to really figure out who the true contenders are for him. I think On3 also reported that he also has a lot of contenders now starting Monday. So they had reported that they listed as Texas and Miami as potential teams that could be in need of a returner, but it remains to be seen if he's even going to take a visit to Texas. There hasn't been any reports of that quite yet. So, but if they start to make some ground with him, I mean, he's arguably better than what Silas Bolden was last season as a return. That's saying quite a lot because Silas Bolden was, I know he only had the one punt return touchdown against Arizona State, but he had a ton of big returns. And you're not going to return it for a touchdown every single time you touch it. So if they're able to get him, that would just be incredible for Jeff Banks and Steve Sarkisian for the special teams. And they emphasize how important special teams are already when it comes to the players they recruit in the secondary that can double up on defensive special teams. But when you add an elite returner, potentially like Marion, we'll see how it goes. That just strengthens already a unit that's pretty strong for Texas. And he started off at UConn, and he actually had his best season as a receiver as a freshman with UConn. And then once he got to BYU, his receiving numbers weren't super productive. I know obviously he's focused on being a returner, so it's not like he's going to be posting 1,000-yard seasons and returning the ball. But I mean, against Texas in 2023, that game that Malik Murphy started, Texas won 35-6. Pretty convincing fashion. I don't know if Texas fans remember, but Marion was actually one of the only guys that did anything to note for BYU that day. He had 3 catches for 30 yards, and then he had 5 kickoff returns for 105 yards. Obviously, Texas was my dog's pushing the door open right here. Texas was obviously kicking the ball off quite a bit in that game, and so he got a lot of chances to return the ball. And it was kind of maybe garbage time production, but he showed what he can do on the field at DKR. So who's to say he can't do that again if he comes to Texas? So I think that'd be awesome for them if they can get him. Sorry, she's throwing shit right now.
It's fine.
But I mean, I believe he's already got 4 years under his belt, and maybe I think maybe he has his COVID year potentially. I'm not sure about that. But I think he has 2 years of eligibility is what On3 had reported. So if they can get him potentially for 2 years, maybe 1, that'd be awesome. But that's a long way to go from now. It remains to be seen because I know a lot of teams are going to have interest in him.
Yeah. And, one of the things that Texas is really looking for here in the portal, I think, is to find a way to replace Silas, because right now they don't really have a kick return option on the team that they're super jazzed about. I think there's some guys back there where if they have to put them out there, they'll be okay. Like I'm sure they have plenty of options available to them, but they'd love to find a guy who can be a real impact player back there sooner than later, because Silas almost broke multiple kicks and punts for touchdowns last year. There were some penalties on special teams that sort of got in the way of those, but he did break one for a score, and it really put that. I believe that was against Arizona State in the second round of college football playoff.
Right.
That really sort of set the tone for that game early on, and gave Texas a great chance to win. Obviously, Arizona State was able to fight back, but if you can add that sort of wrinkle into your program and have an elite special teams unit that can take it to the house at any point, like they had with Xavier Worthy as well, it really makes a difference in how teams approach games against you. So I think they'd really like to bring this guy in if they can, and it will give them a little extra added depth at wide receiver, which I'm sure Sark would sure love after losing so many guys to the NFL, and then they also lost Jonte Cook to the transfer portal after a very, very strange ride. But speaking of Cook, that's probably my best segue of all time. Speaking of Cook, he left Texas, like I said, midway through last year, and now so Cook ended up committing to Washington out of the transfer portal, got dismissed from the team. I think less than a month after. He was only with the team for a few weeks. He gets dismissed, comes back home to Texas, gets into some legal trouble, and eventually finds his way back into the transfer portal. And now he is trying to take some steps to get back into the college football world and put his career back on track. And it seems like he is getting some interest, which you like to see. He's gotten interest from Houston and Oklahoma and BYU, Syracuse and Indiana and Arkansas are also on that list. But this past weekend, he took a visit to Arizona State, which would certainly be an interesting fit, just given his history and Arizona State's reputation as a party school. But I hope the best for Jonte Cook. I think that he is a very, very talented football player, and he's had a rough go of it early on, but I think that he still has a chance to set things right. I don't know that Arizona State is the best fit for him necessarily. They have a very good football program, very talented quarterback with Sam Leavitt. Their coach is, really taken this team to another level in the last couple of years. But I would like to see him stay probably closer to home somewhere in Texas. I know that there's not a lot on that list that I just read about the team showing interest in him that fit that criteria outside of Houston. Oklahoma would also be an interesting fit because, I think he would be a little bit more motivated going into a place like Norman to, have an opportunity to sort of, go against Texas every year. But we'll see what happens there. I do hope the best for him. But Zach, have you heard anything else about this Jonte Cook situation, and where do you think that would anywhere on that list, where would you like to see him end up?
Yeah, I think that Arizona State would actually be a decent fit for him, not because of necessarily scheme wise, but you just see all the Longhorns that have come through there, former Longhorns that have come through there, and why not add him to the list? We saw a bunch of former Longhorns against Texas in that CFP game last year, and so I think him seeing that and being able to learn under a coach like Kenny Dillingham would help maybe get him on the right path back to where people expected him to be coming out of high school at DeSoto. Mm-hmm. And so, we'll see how it goes. But you mentioned Oklahoma as well as a possibility. I mean, that'd be kind of interesting. He'd definitely be super motivated, and he would actually be able to, transfer to an SEC school because he had technically transferred to Washington during the winter portal window, not the spring portal window. So he'd be allowed to do that there because you obviously can't transfer to an SEC school in the same portal window. But yeah, I wish the best for him. I mean, he only met with the media last season once, and I think that he carried himself pretty well. You just wouldn't have expected that, a lot of the stuff behind the scenes would have happened based on the way that he was talking to us at DKR. You can tell that the John Bianco and those guys really had him well trained for media. He was answering the questions really nicely, and carried himself well. And so I think he definitely has still tons of potential when it comes to not just on the football field, but as a person as well. And I really wish the best for him. And so, Arizona State would definitely be interesting just based on what we've seen former Longhorns do there. I know Brian Carrington, their cornerbacks coach, and obviously, coaching the defense, but a guy that's a coach of Texas previously, brought former Longhorns or helped recruit former Longhorns definitely to go to Tempe. So that I think I don't know what's going to happen with Jonte. I'm sure other schools are going to emerge and have interest in him, but Arizona State is a program on the rise next season, and so I think if he wants to have a chance to revitalize his career, I think that would be the most interesting spot. I'm not sure necessarily what's the best fit for him, but I think definitely most interesting.
Yeah, it'd certainly be an interesting fit. I mean, Arizona State sort of this past season sort of stood out from the rest of the CFP pack in a few ways that weren't so flattering, in my opinion. They certainly had some big mouths there, especially with the quarterback and Cam Scadaboo. But I hadn't thought about the Texas connection going into this, so I think that's a good shout. They have a lot of former Texas players on that roster: Prince Dorba, Zach Swanson, a few other guys as well. So, it's certainly a trend that Texas players like to go out there, and most of them have been pretty successful. I think Xavier Alford is another one. All these guys had, a little extra motivation, sure, but they performed very well on a big stage against Texas, and they nearly knocked them off. So, I do think that you're absolutely right. Kenny Dillingham has that program on the rise. It could be something special there over the next couple of years, and Jonte will have 2 years of eligibility left, at least. So, he'll be able to go, maybe 3, honestly. So, he'll be able to go in there and be there for a long time and sort of have an impact there. But why don't we change gears here a little bit to close out the show? We're gonna move to college basketball now. Zach, you have some transfer portal stuff that you'd like to talk about there in terms of a couple of big time prospects that Texas is looking at. So why don't you give us a lowdown on that and what you're hearing there?
Yeah, well, not portal stuff, more high school recruiting. But Shelton Henderson, obviously, former Duke 5-star signee, requested to be released, obviously, from his letter of intent this past weekend, or I believe it was on Friday. But definitely a name to watch for sure for Texas, because he had Louisville, Texas, and Duke in his finalists when he announced that in October, and then he committed to Duke at the beginning of November. So the reported finalists are Miami, A&M, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Texas. And the general consensus is that, and this guy is a Houston native, by the way, so Texas connection there. But the general consensus for most is that he's probably going to head to Miami, just because Jai Lucas, the new head coach there, had a good relationship with him at Duke, because he was the former assistant under John Shire, and then obviously took the head job in Miami after Jim Larinaga had retired midseason, and Miami has just been, after Miami had crushed Texas's Final Four dreams 2 years ago, they have been cursed, in my opinion. The past 2 years, they've been one of the worst Power 5 teams in the country, but they're definitely on the rise. And if they can get Shelton Henderson, Miami's going to be a threat for sure in the ACC next season, and in a weak ACC. But I think that Sean Miller and his staff are going to have their best pitch for him, but it's probably not going to be enough. I think he's maybe using some of these other finalists as maybe some leverage to get potentially some more money from Miami. We'll see how that goes, but I think that if somehow, some way, he were to head to Texas, that would be, he'd arguably start day one. This is, he's a 5-star 2025 forward, so he'd immediately be coming in as a freshman next season, potentially a one and done guy. And Texas fans can dream. I think it's probably unlikely. I don't have any sort of inside info on that, but I just think that the connections he has with Jai Lucas at Miami, and it's worth mentioning they both went to both him and Lucas, obviously at different times, both went to Bel Air High School in the Houston area. And so the connections there are just hard for Texas to compete with. But the fact that they're even in the running for him after the coaching change with Sean Miller just says a lot about, where Sean Miller has this team going. And so I think it had been reported that maybe we could expect a decision from him potentially today, but probably not best to get hopes up too much on that front. But I think it definitely is worth noting that Texas was one of the finalists for him.
Yeah, and we know that Sean Miller and the Longhorns have made a lot of moves via the transfer portal already to try to really round out this roster and find a new starting lineup after the losses of Trey Johnson and some of these other guys. But they're also trying to build for the future, which is where this recruiting stuff comes in. I mean, the one thing that this team still has yet to find is a sort of number one alpha dog scorer, that you can rely on. They're a star, for lack of a better term. Obviously, it's when you lose a guy like Trey Johnson, that's going to be a big blow to your team as a whole. But they've managed to assemble a lot of talent around the roster so far. There's probably still a couple pieces out there that whether it be via recruiting like we're talking about here or another guy in the transfer portal, there's going to be a couple more additions to this roster. We'll see how that shakes out over the coming weeks. One guy that I'm very interested to see what happens with is PJ Haggerty over at Memphis. He was the nation's number one scorer last year. And he's still looking for a home. Obviously that would be a big addition for the Longhorns if they can find a way to bring a guy like that in, but it's been reported that his NIL asking price basically is around $4 million. So we don't know if Texas is going to pony up that kind of money or not.
There's no way.
Yeah. We'll have to see about that. Maybe Sean Miller can sweet talk some donors there, but the odds of that are very low in my opinion. Right. That's for sure. But there'll be a few other names that pop up. We'll have some more speculation and news here for you over the coming weeks for both football and basketball. But this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about over the next few weeks. That's for sure, because Texas has been very active in both sports, and there's just going to be a lot to talk about, Zach, and that's why we're starting up this brand new podcast. And we're still riding with the training wheels here a little bit. This is episode number 1. We're gonna hammer it out a little bit more and fine tune some things. But this was a lot of fun, Zach. For our listeners out there, we're gonna shoot for a daily show in the morning, around the same time every day, around 10 to 11 a.m. probably. But when we get closer to the season, it's gonna expand a little bit. We're gonna have some more fun things. We're gonna have some guests and things like that. But Zach, why don't we wrap it up there? We will be back tomorrow for another live stream around 10 a.m. Like I said, you can find it on our YouTube channel at Texas Longhorns on SI, on our Facebook page, which is, going to be linked here. We'll also be live on Twitter tomorrow, as I need to upgrade a certain thing over there so I can make us live on Twitter. But we will be back tomorrow. Zach, I appreciate your time. Let's call it there. I got to figure out an outro for this podcast eventually, but we're going to figure that out. But make sure to join us tomorrow here around 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, and we will see you guys there.